What up, guys? Welcome to Mainstream Drug Talk. This is my very first video. I appreciate you guys watching. Today the topic will be Suboxone versus Methadone. Both these drugs are treatments for opiate dependence. They're essentially replacement drugs to replace the illegal narcotics that addicts are getting off the street with hopefully a safer alternative that they can get from a doctor and a pharmacy. Now, by the time an addict starts taking these replacement drugs, they're almost always at a point where stopping cold turkey will result in severe withdrawal symptoms, which generally 99% of the time is going to lead them to relapse and lead them back to their opiate of choice or just street opiates in general. So that is the use for these. And there's some really good things about both these treatment options, and there's some really bad things that I feel aren't fully understood. There's a lot of myths about both these drugs, so I hope this video can be informative and help you make the right choice. And if you're already on these drugs, it can give you an idea of what to expect in the future. I do have experience with both these substances, so I can speak from firsthand experience. Alright, let's get into some of the similarities between Suboxone and Methadone. They're both prescribed medications, so that should make it safer because you know what you're getting rather than buying, a random powder or a random black tar, or even if you're buying oxys on the street. There's a ton of fake oxys going around that are laced with fentanyl, so you never really know what you're getting if you're buying something off the street. Whereas with these medications, you yourself are getting them from the pharmacist. You know what it is, so therefore it should make it safer in that regard. Both Suboxone and Methadone have long half-lives, which allows you to dose once per day. I know sometimes people would dose Suboxone, especially twice per day, but they're usually cutting their one dose into two. So for instance, if they're prescribed 8 milligrams, they're taking 4 in the morning and 4 at night, or if they're prescribed 4 milligrams, they're taking 2 in the morning and 2 at night. And in my experience, you don't need to do this. The half-life is so long on both these substances, but on Suboxone as well, that you don't need to split your dose up and take 1 in the morning, 1 at night. I actually tend to think that feeds into your addictive, compulsive behavior, so I always recommend to dose both these substances once per day, and I think that's a benefit, and it's also a similarity for both these drugs. One other similarity is the way they bind to your receptors. They bind to your receptors so strong that even if you were to take heroin or oxy or some other sort of opiate, it's not going to give you much of any effect because your opiate receptor is already filled with the Suboxone, which is buprenorphine, or the methadone, so there's really no room for the oxy or heroin, which don't bind to the receptors as strongly, to get into your brain. So if anything, you'll feel only mild effects from street opiates after you've dosed both these medications. So that's a similarity, and I think it's another benefit. One more similarity is they're both used during pregnancy. So if you're a female and you just found out you're pregnant, and let's say you're addicted to oxy, you're addicted to heroin, both these medications can be used during pregnancy, and they are commonly used during pregnancy. So that's definitely a similarity between the two. What else? Counseling. Both generally are prescribed alongside counseling. So you're not just going to be giving the drug and say, hey, you're out on your own. If you're getting prescribed Suboxone, you're usually going to go in to see a psychiatrist either once a week, once every 2 weeks, once a month, and the psychiatrist is going to give you some counseling to help you stay on whatever your goals are and stay on that righteous path, as they would say. And same with methadone. Methadone, you are going to see a counselor at the clinic in most cases, once every 2 weeks or once every month. And also both these medications generally come along with drug tests to make sure that you're only taking the medication and nothing else. They do have some leeway. They do understand that we're addicts, so they're not going to kick you off the program the first time you test dirty. But every program is different. I've been on some programs that will kick you off, especially if you're taking something like benzodiazepines that has adverse effects with opiates, those are not really looked well upon, and they will often cut your dose down immediately if you test positive for a benzodiazepine. But in general, if you're doing something else like cocaine or meth, they're going to give you a chance, a few chances. I've been on clinics where I've seen people, or I myself, have tested dirty up to 10 times in a row before they finally said, hey, if you test dirty again, you're going to get kicked off. But regardless, there is a degree of accountability that you're going to see a counselor and you're going to get tested if you're prescribed either one of these substances. Let's see, what other similarities? They're a little bit less abusable than your common opiates, like again, oxy or heroin, and this is due to their effects. Now, methadone is a full opiate agonist, and Suboxone is a partial opiate agonist, and that means that methadone, I guess you could say, is a little bit more abusable, but in general, they're both much less abusable than the common street opiates. And this is because the higher you go in dose generally doesn't increase the high nearly as much. Whereas if you're taking 20 milligrams of oxy and you double it to 40 milligrams of oxy, or you're taking 50 milligrams of oxy and double it to 100, you're going to notice a huge difference in the effects. Whereas with methadone, if you're taking 50 milligrams of methadone and you double it to 100 milligrams of methadone, you're really not going to notice the effects nearly as much, the increased effects nearly as much, especially if you've been on methadone for a while. Now, if you're opiate naive and you take methadone, 50 milligrams one day and you haven't taken opiates before, and the next day you take 100, then yeah, there's going to be a huge difference. But if you're taking 50 milligrams of methadone every day and for months, and then one random day you decide you're going to take 100, you're not going to notice a huge increase in your high. So for this reason alone, both these medications are much less abusable. And this is especially true for Suboxone. If you're taking 4 milligrams of Suboxone every day and you take 8 milligrams one day, you're not going to feel, in my opinion, you're not going to feel any higher than you were on the 4. If anything, you might get some side effects like nausea and headaches and some other not so pleasant effects. So both these medications are less abusable if you're on them long term. All right, let's get into some of the differences. The first one that comes to my mind is that you're going to be getting your Suboxone from a psychiatrist, which means you're going to go have a one-on-one meeting, like I said, once a week, once every 2 weeks, or once every month, and then he's going to write you a prescription that you are going to take to a pharmacy, fill, and you will have your medication in your hand for that period. Now, this can be a good or a bad thing. It can be bad because Suboxones are worth a little bit of money. So if you have them in your possession, it may be tempting for the addict to go off and sell their medication and buy their opiate of choice, or for them to compulsively dose more than the doctor prescribes and then run out early. Whereas with methadone, you're going to go to a clinic every day to start. And for a while, you're going to be going every day. And this can be good because you're guaranteed to get your dose every day. It's up to them to give it to you. You don't have control of it, so you're not going to get sick because you ran out early. But this has its own drawbacks because you're at a clinic surrounded by addicts. A lot of those addicts aren't really serious about getting better. They're just taking the methadone because they could no longer afford their habit. And in the meantime, after their dose, they're off, smoking crack or doing meth or crime or all sorts of nefarious activities. So surrounding yourself with those type of people at a clinic is definitely a downside, in my opinion, compared to going to a psychiatrist. So you kind of have to weigh the pros of the cons, whether you think you can control holding your Suboxone medication and taking it as prescribed daily versus needing the clinic to give it to you every day so that you don't compulsively use it all in 2 weeks and then have to kick for 2 weeks or go back to whatever you were doing before. Another difference between the two is the cost and the availability. If you don't have insurance, Suboxone is much more expensive than methadone. Methadone clinics can run anywhere from 200 a month to 400 a month. I'm sure there might be places that are a little cheaper, a little bit more expensive, but Suboxone, you're looking at, $100 or $200 to see the doctor, and then to go fill your prescription, they're $5 to $10 a pill or a strip. So, one prescription for Suboxone, including the doctor, could be $400, $500, and that might only be for 2 weeks worth, depending on what your dose is. So Suboxone is more expensive in general, but this will depend upon your insurance and your location. So you're gonna have to do some research on your own to find out, where the closest clinic is, where the Suboxone doctors are, if the Suboxone doctors take your insurance. And don't give up if you only call one or two and they don't take your insurance. Just keep calling around. They've changed the laws, so it's easier now for doctors to prescribe Suboxone than it was, 10 years ago when they had a certain amount of patients they were allowed to see, and a lot of insurances weren't covering it. So do your research for sure before you pick one or the other in terms of the cost effectiveness. And the location can be a big deal, especially for the methadone clinics. Almost every big city, I would say every big city, has multiple methadone clinics and multiple Suboxone doctors. But if you're living kind of out in the boonies, there might not be a methadone clinic for 60 miles or more. I've heard of people driving over 100 miles to go to a methadone clinic, where chances are you can find a doctor that will prescribe Suboxone a lot closer than that. So that is a difference, the cost and the availability, and that's up to you to do the research to find out, what's cheapest for you and what's the most convenient. Another difference is going to be effectiveness, but this is going to come up to the individual. I'm not going to comment on what's more effective because there's really not much empirical data that I can point to say, hey, this one is way better, Suboxone is way better than methadone, or methadone is way better than Suboxone. You can look online and find, thousands of accounts of people saying this is better than this, or this is better than this. So it really comes down to the individual. I found that Suboxone was better for me in terms of recovery. It provides sort of a, how to describe it, almost like an antidepressant effect that I didn't find with methadone. Methadone felt more like a traditional opiate, but without the euphoria. Whereas Suboxone just killed the cravings and almost gave me like antidepressant. I guess that's the only way to say it. It gave me an uplifting mood. It put me in a good mood. And I found that this good mood helped me progress in my life, to go get a job and better the relationships with my family. Whereas when I was on methadone, none of those things happened. I was a poly drug user on methadone. I was just off running the streets doing other drugs. Now, this isn't, again, to say that that's going to happen for everyone. I was also at different points in my lives when I was taking Suboxone versus methadone. So this is just my own personal anecdotal account. So take that with a grain of salt. But for me, I did find that Suboxone was more effective in recovery than methadone. Now, when it comes to detox, if I was to recommend something for a taper, not for long-term maintenance, and this is for someone who is serious about getting clean. If you're 100% serious about getting clean, I would recommend methadone versus Suboxone, because methadone is a lot easier to lower the dose gradually. You can lower it by 1 milligram at a time, whereas Suboxone, once you get down to 1 milligram, that's still covering a large part of your opiate receptors. If you jump off of 1 milligram cold turkey, you're going to go into withdrawal pretty severe. It's not going to be much different than jumping off 3 milligrams of Suboxone. So it's really hard to get off Suboxone because they don't make pills small enough to get your dose down to where you're taking, 0.1 milligram of Suboxone. Whereas methadone, you can lower it 1 milligram at a time, and you can get down to 1 milligram a couple times a day, where it's really just placebo to help you sleep and help the jitters a little bit, peace of mind. And in that sense, I think that methadone is far greater than Suboxone for a short-term detox. Neither of them are great for really short-term, what I would consider short-term for a long, someone who's been using heroin or oxy for multiple years, maybe have tried to quit multiple times and always go back due to withdrawal symptoms. I would recommend something like a 6-month methadone detox, starting out at something like 60 milligrams, and then talk to your counselor about lowering it gradually to the point where you get down to below 10 milligrams, and you can just keep lowering it from there. Where with Suboxone, that's really not an option. And honestly, firsthand account, I think Suboxone withdrawal is more intense than methadone. So that might have something to do with the way it binds to the receptors. It's kind of odd because it's a partial agonist. You would think that the withdrawal from methadone is worse, but in my experience, the withdrawal from Suboxone is much worse, and that's at a low dose. I've never taken more than, my highest was 12 milligrams, and I was only there for a couple months. I got down to 4 milligrams. And there was a weekend where I missed my doctor appointment on a Thursday. He was out of town on a Friday. I couldn't get back in to see him till the following Wednesday. And I was only on 3 milligrams at the time. And it was the worst withdrawal I've ever felt. And I've kicked methadone, and I've kicked 80 milligrams of methadone cold turkey in jail. But the 3 milligram withdrawal from Suboxone was the worst I've ever felt. So if you're looking for a detox schedule and you're serious about getting clean, that's the key. Serious about getting clean, I would recommend methadone over Suboxone. If you're looking for maintenance, or maybe one day you want to get off but you're not serious, like 100% serious about getting clean right now, then I would recommend Suboxone. But because of those antidepressant effects, it's going to help you get your life in order a little bit better than methadone will, in my opinion. It's going to help you get a job, better your relationships, and avoid some of that poly drug use that has been associated, at least with me, in methadone. Alright, I'm going to wrap this up. If you have any questions or comments, concerns, leave it down below. This is a brand new channel, so feel free to hit subscribe, hit like, help me out, help me build this channel up. I have a lot of really cool ideas for the future here, including going and talking to random people on the street, getting their stories and how they ended up where they are, and all sorts of other cool ideas like that. So I'd really appreciate a like and a sub so I can get some motivation to keep pumping out these videos. Both Suboxone and methadone do what they're designed to do, which is to replace one opiate with another. That's kind of a conservative talking point against these drugs. You're just replacing one addiction with another, and that's true. That's what you're doing. You're replacing one addiction for another that isn't nearly as dangerous. So that's what they do. They both work great at it, and a lot of it's going to come down to personal preference. If you have any questions about my own personal experience that I didn't address in this video, again, feel free to leave it down below. And stay safe out there. Hopefully things open up and we can get back to work here shortly. And I can open up and tell you a little bit more about myself, my story, and how I got here, because I came a long way. So look forward to talking to you guys in the future, and have a great weekend. Peace.